Anna. Wasn't your last video about Wordle? How did we get from that to ethnic cleansing? It's true, today's topic is a lot darker, but I still refuse to be the doom and gloom type of newscaster. With most of the Western world being shocked and appalled by the reports we're getting of Russian action in Ukraine, and a small minority of people thinking it's a good thing, I want to share some research by leading experts on how situations like this actually evolve. Specifically, how do people, fathers, husbands, colleagues, friends, become motivated to kill men, women, and children? Regardless of what you think is happening in Ukraine, how does that happen? $5 says it starts with a staff meeting. Sorry, I guess I shouldn't joke about it. And what can we do if we see signs that it might happen again? I think it's worth a difficult conversation, and that's what we do here. By the way, all sources referenced in this video are linked in the description. Hello, welcome to Black, White, Gray, Yellow. For the first time on April 15, 2022, US President Biden referred to Russia's actions in Ukraine as genocide, citing the horrific and what we have reason to think are intentional killings of thousands of non-combatant civilians so far, including men, women, and children. How does this happen? How does genocide ever happen? Gregory Stanton, the founder and president of the group Genocide Watch, published what he calls the 10 Stages of Genocide, which sounds like about the absolute worst 10-step program ever. Hey, I thought it was my job to make the jokes. However, it can help us understand how things like this actually happen, specifically how ordinary people can become motivated to commit horrible atrocities against other people. It also helps us recognize the warning signs and tells us what we can do to stop it from happening again. And I'm going to try to emphasize those aspects of the list in this video. I first learned about the 10 stages from Barbara F. Walters' book, How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. I'm going to take excerpts from both Stanton's paper and Walters' book for the rest of this video, and links to both are in the description. A quick note, both of these sources refer to genocide as it commonly happens during civil wars, where one part of the population is turned against their neighbors. Of course, we here in Western countries do not see the Russian invasion of Ukraine as a civil war because we recognize Ukraine as a sovereign nation. But our understanding of Russian President Vladimir Putin's view of the situation is that he does see Ukraine as part of his rightful empire. Unfortunately, splitting this hair does nothing for the Ukrainian people. It is fair to point out, though, that the entire Russian population has not been turned against their neighbors in Ukraine. Only the Russian military has. Thanks to Russian propaganda and state-controlled media, the Russian civilians now range from those who protest against the government despite that now being illegal, to those who might protest against the government except that now they're too afraid to speak out, to those who avoid politics altogether. And some think that that may be out of fear that their entire worldview would collapse if they looked at anything other than the Russian propaganda too closely. However, Walters tells us, a country does not need a large percentage of the population to be involved for violent ethnic cleansing to occur. You just need the rest of the population to remain passive, which can easily be accomplished through intimidation. Russian President Putin has used a combination of propaganda and intimidation going back years to feed the Russian people a story that there is no war in Ukraine, that it's just a special military operation to liberate or protect Russian sympathizers from neo-Nazis, and to provide them a strong incentive to buy it, at least outwardly. But what about the Russian soldiers? Are they all sociopathic murderers inducted into the KGB? Well, some of their leadership might be, but the Russian army consists of hundreds of thousands of troops, most of which, though interestingly not all, have been recruited from the very same civilian population kept ignorant because they can't be trusted not to support the Ukrainians. So what happened to them? How did Vladimir Putin turn them into murderers? And if they can be turned, who else can? And how do we stop it? Citizens almost never believe that ethnic cleansing could happen in their country. What is striking and alarming about Stanton's framework is how normal and seemingly innocuous many of the early stages of genocide are. By the way, in the quotes on the screen, when you see the ellipses, the 3 dots that say I'm leaving things out, it's just to try to keep the video as short as possible. I would read you the whole book if that weren't a copyright violation and I thought you would stay. The first 2 stages are known as classification and symbolization. This is when an identity group in power begins to highlight differences among a country's citizens, categorizing them by groups, and then adopting certain markers for themselves or others, as the Nazis did when they appropriated swastikas and forced Jews to wear yellow stars of David on their clothing. The classification in Ukraine is between the primarily Russian-speaking people, mostly in the more rural eastern Ukraine, who tend to favor Russia over the West, and the primarily Ukrainian-speaking people, mostly in the more urban western Ukraine, who tend to favor the West over Russia. These are broad generalizations, though, and we shouldn't assume that every Ukrainian fits neatly into one of these 2 boxes. Here's what George Stanton says about the first 2 stages. Classification. All cultures have categories to distinguish people into us and them. Bipolar societies that lack mixed categories are the most likely to have genocide. The main preventative measure at this early stage is to develop universalistic institutions that transcend ethnic or racial divisions, that actively promote tolerance and understanding, and that promote classifications that transcend the divisions. The search for common ground is vital to early prevention of genocide. In symbolization, we give names or other symbols to the classifications. We name people Jews or Gypsies. Classification and symbolization are universally human and do not necessarily result in genocide unless they lead to dehumanization. So these early stages are just about establishing an us and a them. We look different, we sound different, we wear different clothes, we celebrate different holidays or the same holiday differently. We go to different churches or political rallies. We support different politicians. A lot of times we want people to know what camp we're in, but hateful symbolization can involve forcing identifiers on other people. Still, Stanton says there's nothing inherently wrong with these distinctions unless it leads to dehumanization. So let's take a look at what the next couple of stages look like. Stage 3 is discrimination, which is when a dominant group denies or suppresses the rights of others by means of law or custom. Stage 4, dehumanization, easily follows. Those in power use public discourse to turn regular citizens against the targeted minority, denigrating them as criminals or subhuman. And here's what Stanton says. Discrimination. A dominant group uses law, custom, and political power to deny the rights of other groups. The powerless group may not be accorded full civil rights or even citizenship. Prevention against discrimination means full political empowerment and citizenship rights for all groups in a society. Okay, admittedly this gets complicated because not all groups in a society are always citizens, and there is a whole rabbit hole we can go down there that I'm going to save for another video. Citizenship rights in a democratic society include things like being able to run for office, being represented in a representative body of government, and just being able to vote. Well, that explains why everyone's losing their minds over voting rights in the US today. Ukraine is again an interesting case because within the Ukrainian border, the Western-leaning Ukrainian speakers were actually the majority in what they see and what we recognize as their nation. So they didn't suffer discrimination or oppression from their own government. For the record, neither did the Russian speakers. But, as stated previously, it seems like Russian President Putin did see the Western-leaning Ukrainians as a threatening minority in his empire. And he did use his position of power as a dangerous next-door neighbor to prevent Ukraine from doing things that other sovereign nations are able to do, like join NATO if they want to. But then it escalates. Dehumanization is when one group denies the humanity of the other group. Members are equaled with animals, vermin, insects, or diseases. Dehumanization overcomes the normal human revulsion against murder. That's a key point. So people who get upset about being called dehumanizing names didn't just not hear the bit about sticks and stones when they were growing up. That said, someone disagreeing with you is not inherently dehumanizing. Yes, I realize I just set myself up for a lot of hateful, but not dehumanizing, comments. At this stage, hate propaganda in print and on hate radios is used to vilify the victim group. In combating this dehumanization, incitement to genocide should not be confused with protected speech. At the same time, genocidal societies lack constitutional protection for countervailing speech and should be treated differently than democracies. So, in a democracy, you should be able to disagree with people and express unpopular opinions without consequence. But calling for or even suggesting the possible benefits of violence against other people should not be considered protected speech. I'm not saying you can't express dark humor in your own home, but on public platforms, it's not okay. Now, I don't know what the Russian army was calling the Ukrainians prior to the invasion, but as we'll see in a minute, by the time they invaded and at the time of this recording, they're calling them Nazis, and they mean it literally. Even though Nazis are technically human, and if you just shared my eye roll, you're proving my point, it still counts as denigrating people as criminals, and I actually think people are more likely to overcome the normal human revulsion against murder for a Nazi than for a cockroach, because a Nazi chose to be that way. It's right up there with child molester and rapist. And I already feel homicidal when people drive slower than 5 under the speed limit. Then again, there are child molesters and rapists in the world, so I guess my point is that it's a serious accusation and we should try not to cry wolf with it. There may be Nazi sympathizers in Ukraine, but they are not the vast majority of the civilians that have died to Russian hands because of how that term has been abused. Unfortunately, people both in and out of Ukraine either dismissed these accusations or weren't aware of them at all, because who outside of Russia watches Russian propaganda? And sadly, this only contributed to them being blindsided by the invasion and by the force of the Russians' assault. Okay, Diana, but there is still a huge gap between what I yell at people in traffic or on the internet and actually committing murder, let alone indiscriminate genocide. Thank goodness. Right. Let me pick it up to explain how things go really wrong. The fifth stage is organization. This is where a dominant group begins to assemble an army or militia and formulate plans to eradicate other groups. Admittedly, it's hard to know if these groups exist or if they are plotting to eradicate other groups unless you're a member of one of these groups, and I'm not saying you should go join one to find out. This is what Stanton says. Organization. Genocide is always organized, usually by the state, often using militias to provide deniability of state responsibility. Sometimes organization is informal, such as mobs led by local militants, or decentralized, like with terrorist groups. Special army units or militias are often trained and armed. Plans are made for genocidal killings. Again, until the post-mortem, so to speak, I'm not sure how anyone outside the organization would know the militia's plans, but I guess if they came to light, take it seriously? To combat this stage, members of these militias should be outlawed. Their leaders should be denied visas for foreign travel. The UN should blah blah blah. To be clear, I do not think this is saying that members of all militias need to be outlawed. I'm in the National Guard, for goodness sakes. Again, I'll state the disclaimer that all opinions expressed on this channel are mine alone and do not necessarily reflect any institution with which I'm affiliated. Militias building up a security posture to defend against aggression? Okay. Militias plotting to go on the offensive against civilian non-combatants? Not okay. I really hope these aren't controversial statements. Russian President Putin is infamous for using what we call false flag operations to support Russian deniability of state responsibility. He still uses the formidable state-sponsored Russian army, but he orchestrates special operations to make it look like the other side attacked him first, and then uses that to justify rolling in with full force. Regardless of your feelings of US President Biden, had he not spoiled the effect by releasing certain intelligence, the intelligence community is pretty sure Russian President Putin would have done the same thing again in Ukraine. Without people calling it out like US President Biden did in this case, this is unfortunately a devastatingly effective tactic. In Stage 6, polarization, the dominant group escalates the propaganda, further demonizing and separating the target groups. Often, interaction between groups is discouraged or prohibited, and moderate members of the dominant group, those who resist or protest these efforts, are imprisoned or killed. This is where I imagine things should get very scary for most people if they're aware of what's going on, but amazingly often they aren't. It usually benefits the polarizing group to make eliminating people quiet or seem justified, hence why Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny is currently serving a 9-year sentence for crimes the international community is pretty sure he didn't commit. And yes, this was after he survived a poison attempt by a chemical nicknamed Putin's signature. To be fair, he also wasn't a moderate of the dominant group. They all seem to have disappeared more quietly. Not all Russians buy the propaganda, of course, but as stated earlier, few dare speak up because demonstrations against the government are now illegal. In places where the state has less control than the Kremlin has over Russia, where imprisoning or killing your opposition, including your own moderates, might raise just a few too many eyebrows, the polarizing group may instead just remove moderates from political office, find ways to discredit them, radicalize them, or censure them. This is Stanton's entry for polarization. In polarization, extremists drive the groups apart. Hate groups broadcast polarizing propaganda. Laws may forbid intermarriage or social interaction. Extremist terrorism targets moderates, intimidating and silencing the center. Moderates from the perpetrator's own group are most able to stop genocide, so are the first to be arrested and killed. Prevention may mean security protection for moderate leaders or assistance to human rights groups. I'm going to add a piece here on the prevention of polarization, which is to stop consuming polarizing media. I know you might not think this if you watch a lot of mainstream American media, and I don't know about other countries, but it is actually possible to get all the important information without sounding like a cliche. Jerry, that sounds tragic. And now, over to Tom with the weather. Tom? I'll put links in the description to my current favorite news sources, and if you know of any others that do a pretty good job of keeping a balanced narrative in a neutral tone, I'd love you to tell me in the comments. The steps toward ethnic cleansing are often so gradual as to feel imperceptible, but according to the 10 stages of genocide, there's a noticeable shift that takes place with Stage 7. Known as the preparation stage, this is when leaders indoctrinate the populace with fear of becoming the victim, claiming that if we don't kill them, they will kill us. It's after this indoctrination that a country can explode quickly into stages 8 and 9, persecution and extermination. Stage 7 is significant, in other words, because it's when the logic of genocide develops as a means of self-defense. It's common to think that ethnic cleansing is driven by hate. There is hate, yes, but the real fuel is fear. Fear that you are threatened and vulnerable. Violence entrepreneurs tap into this anxiety, exploiting the survival instinct that cues you to destroy your enemy before he can destroy you. Walter then uses a quote from Hermann Göring, convicted war criminal and one of the most powerful figures in the Nazi Party. He said, It is always a simple matter to drag the people along. All you have to do is tell them that they are being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism. If that doesn't make your stomach turn. The fact that it also worked on some Westerners just makes it that much harder for us to agree on what to do about it. Some eyewitnesses say the Russian soldiers genuinely believe they're fighting Nazis and are even scared of them. Other reports talk of Russian soldiers who defected after feeling duped. This in no way excuses Russian soldiers' behavior, much of which is unspeakably awful. What's important to remember here is that it's not the violence entrepreneurs who foster and exploit people's fear, but the everyday people whose fears have been exploited who most often do the killing and worse. And they think they're doing the righteous thing, or at least acting in self-defense. They've been manipulated to think that way. Again, Russian President Putin has largely used lies and propaganda to keep his citizens ignorant, confused, or fearful, but most importantly, passive. But as far as we can tell, this is exactly the tactic that he's used to turn thousands of Russian soldiers into killers, rapists, and terrorizers of non-combatant civilians. Average Serbs in Bosnia did not want war. Their leaders, however, needed average citizens to fight on their behalf to secure power. Their solution? To tell their followers they would soon be attacked, prompting many to jump into action. This is how Stanton describes this pivotal stage. Preparation. National or perpetrator group leaders plan the final solution to the targeted group question. They often use euphemisms to cloak their intentions, such as referring to their goals as purification or counterterrorism. They build armies, buy weapons, and train their troops and militias. They indoctrinate the populace with fear of the victim group. Prevention of preparation should include prosecution of incitement and conspiracy. Stanton gives a lot of preventative advice for national leaders, but speaks little about what ordinary people like you and I can do, so here's my 2 cents. If you see or hear Russian President Putin or Russian propaganda or any other political figure or media outlet trying to make people afraid, trying to deliberately foster and exploit the anxiety and fear, which is not the same thing as telling bad news or explaining how bad things are, but deliberately catastrophizing with no focus on what we can do about it, and then especially if they at all suggest that offensive violence might be your best defense, don't buy it. Don't watch it. Call it out. If you know people around you who are buying that narrative, you can help both the situation and their mental health by introducing them to the non-catastrophic sources of news. Again, my favorites are linked in the description. I can't tell people not to defend themselves, but nothing bad happens if nobody makes the first move, so if this happens around you, don't be that guy, and don't let your friends be that guy. Hashtag friends don't let friends start a genocide. But I love catastrophes. How else am I supposed to get my heart rate up? I'm certainly not gonna go do cardio. In Ukraine, though, unfortunately, it looks like Russian President Putin was that guy, and it looks like Russian troops have quickly escalated to the persecution and extermination phases during their offensive to liberate Ukraine from Nazis. For the sake of not letting this video get too long or too dark, oh good, I thought I missed that boat 10 minutes ago. I'll let you follow the link in the description to read Stanton's paragraphs on those stages on your own. However, I do want to note that the 10th and final stage of genocide, as Stanton sees it, is denial. Denial is the final stage that lasts throughout and always follows a genocide. It is among the surest indicators of further genocidal massacres. The perpetrators of genocide try to cover up the evidence and intimidate the witnesses. They deny they committed any crimes and often blame what happened on the victims. This could well be a description of the last 2 months in Ukraine. Russia continues to deny any wrongdoing in a tone that is persuasive to at least some of its citizens, and apparently some Westerners, and mocking to everyone else. They claim the Ukrainians killed their own people to frame the Russian army, and have come up with increasingly elaborate narratives to explain or simply ignored evidence that condemns Russian troops as it emerges. Stanton again lists things that international organizations can do to bring war criminals to justice, but there are things we can do right now. Unfortunately, it isn't as easy as saying, just call out the lies, because remember, Russian President Putin is very eloquently serenading his people with the narrative that it's everyone else who's lying. You have to spot the lie. When a political figure like Putin says, these people are dangerous and you should feel threatened and we need to act against them before they act against us, you have to spot the lie. When 2 different political figures like Putin and Navalny each point at each other and each says the other is lying, you have to look at who controls the media, who controls what narrative. Follow the money, as they say, and you have to spot the lie. when money is flowing in from all sources and there are more agendas than there are snakes in an Egyptian death pit. You have to take a deep breath. You have to look for truly independent sources. These are often, but not always, scientists, humanitarian activists, eyewitnesses, and you have to spot the lie. Okay, miss, I don't like doom and gloom. Can you give any more hints? All right. Individuals on all sides will be liars, especially if all sides have politicians, so that isn't a smoking gun. And all sides can be guilty of different things, but there are key things that we can look for to help us spot the big lies, like lies about genocide and lies that can lead to it. Like Putin, is one group accusing others of doing exactly what they then do? This often looks like accusations of partisanship or cheating that are then used to justify changes that support partisanship or cheating. Have moderates of any group been censured, been discredited, or just disappeared? Pay close attention if anyone silenced was an extremist or a moderate. Groups that censure extremists are trying to avoid violence, among other outcomes. Groups that censure moderates are barreling toward it. And finally, does any group feature people or programs that seem to deliberately foster or try to exploit existential fear? There are always reasons to be afraid, but good leaders should be offering non-violent, non-discriminatory, non-dehumanizing paths away from that danger. Not all media is bad, and neither are all politicians. But the good ones try to keep you rational, not emotional. This is because emotional people are much easier to oppress than rational ones. That's it for this episode, and thank you for sticking with me. I know it was a long one. If you like this video, please give it a like, and if you want more videos like this, please subscribe. Tell me in the comments how you feel about this video. As always, please keep the comments positive and constructive, especially if discussion breaks out between you and another viewer. I fully support this, just no dehumanizing language, please. Thanks everyone, until next time. My name is Diana, I'm going to casually mention that I'm not suicidal, and this has been Black, White, Gray, Yellow. $5 says it starts with a staff meeting. Sorry, I guess I shouldn't joke about it. He still uses the formidable state-sponsored Russian army, but he's But I love catastrophes! How else am I supposed to get my heart rate up? I'm certainly not going to go do cardio. If you found it informative, please give it a like. And if you found... Hey, I thought it was my job to make the jokes. Are we still here?